On August 7, 1942, a formidable contingent of 16,000 United States Marines found themselves engaged in the arduous task of wading through chest-deep surf, making landfall on an obscure island whose name, Guadalcanal, proved largely unpronounceable to the majority of the troops. This particular location, a sweltering expanse of dense jungle situated within the sprawling Solomon Islands archipelago, presented these men with an objective that, on paper, appeared deceptively simple: to seize control of an airfield then under construction by Japanese forces. With an unexpected combination of swiftness and relatively light resistance, the Marines accomplished this initial mission within approximately 36 hours, prompting the Japanese defenders to retreat into the dense, verdant jungle. Such a rapid success might have led one to believe the mission was accomplished. However, this early triumph merely served as the ominous prelude to a far more profound and harrowing ordeal that was about to unfold. The critical airfield they had managed to secure was, in reality, far from completion. It constituted little more than a rudimentary clearing of raw earth. Yet, this was no ordinary soil. It was a distinctive tropical earth, subjected to a relentless cycle of baking under the intense, unforgiving equatorial sun one moment, only to be hammered mercilessly by the deluge of monsoon rains the next. When desiccated, this ground became incredibly unyielding, possessing a hardness akin to solid concrete. Conversely, when thoroughly saturated by rainfall, it underwent a dramatic and complete transformation, liquefying into a viscous, unmanageable mire, often described as having the consistency of thick chocolate pudding. Confronted with this unpredictable and treacherous strip of land, the Marines quickly grasped that they were standing on the precipice of a logistical nightmare, a problem that held the potential to claim the lives of every man present. The fundamental truth, often overlooked in initial strategic planning for island warfare in the Pacific, is this: ultimate victory is not achieved merely by holding ground, but rather by establishing and maintaining absolute control over the airspace above it. And that crucial aerial supremacy remains utterly unattainable without the reliable functionality of an operational runway. The Japanese command, acutely aware of the strategic asset they had forfeited, wasted no time in demonstrating their understanding. Within a mere few days of its capture, their formidable bombers commenced a relentless campaign of pounding the newly acquired landing strip, which the Marines had patriotically christened Henderson Field, in solemn tribute to a valiant pilot who had perished during the pivotal Battle of Midway. We invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this video to fully appreciate the unfolding narrative. Your support, through a simple like and subscription, would be immensely appreciated. Please also consider sharing a comment below, letting us know where you are watching from and your thoughts on this critical historical topic. Yet, the gravest and most insidious adversary confronting the beleaguered forces on Guadalcanal was not the explosive ordnance raining down from enemy aircraft. It was the omnipresent, treacherous mud. Following each inevitable tropical downpour, the vital runway was rendered completely unusable. The valiant Wildcats and dauntless dive bombers, representing the Marines' sole source of aerial protection, began to succumb to the treacherous surface, their landing gear sinking perilously into the mire. Maintenance crews, witnessing this devastating spectacle, were gripped by a profound sense of horror as entire landing gear struts vanished beneath the viscous muck. In one particularly dramatic incident, a pilot attempting to launch for a vital intercept mission found his aircraft's wheels excavating trenches a staggering 4 feet deep before the plane could even gain forward momentum, preventing any hope of liftoff. Consequently, he remained grounded, and the Japanese bombers he was tasked with neutralizing arrived unimpeded and unopposed a mere 20 minutes later, highlighting the catastrophic operational paralysis caused by the impassable runway. In a desperate attempt to salvage the critical situation, the engineers on site exhausted every known method and resource at their disposal. They endeavored to fortify the runway by packing it densely with crushed coral extracted directly from the nearby beaches, only to watch their efforts literally dissolve and wash away with the very next torrential downpour. Next, they deployed pierced steel planking, typically reserved for rapid bridge construction, hoping it would provide a stable surface. However, this material proved equally susceptible to the harsh environment, warping and buckling severely under the intense tropical heat. Even the seemingly straightforward approach of compacting the soil with heavy rollers proved futile, as the machinery itself became hopelessly mired in the intractable ground. By the middle of August, the functionality of Henderson Field had dwindled to an alarming degree, operating perhaps only 3 days out of every 7. During these periods of non-operation, the Marines on the ground were left utterly exposed and vulnerable. The absence of air cover permitted Japanese naval vessels to bombard their positions with impunity, and enemy ground forces could be reinforced under the cloak of darkness without fear of aerial interdiction. The strategic calculus was stark, brutal, and unequivocally clear. Without a reliable, all-weather operational runway, the retention of Guadalcanal was untenable. Should Guadalcanal fall, the broader Pacific offensive would be critically jeopardized, potentially stalling for an additional year, or even longer, with devastating consequences for the Allied war effort. Thousands of miles away, in the nation's capital, the escalating crisis on Guadalcanal inevitably found its way to the highest echelons of military engineering, landing squarely on the desk of the Army Corps of Engineers in Washington. A torrent of increasingly desperate radio transmissions poured in from the Pacific theater, each conveying the same urgent plea: an immediate, viable solution was required, and ideally, it should have arrived yesterday. This was not, however, an entirely novel challenge for the Corps of Engineers. They had, in fact, been grappling with the perplexing issue of constructing functional runways on soft, unstable ground since well before the attack on Pearl Harbor, conducting extensive tests in diverse and challenging environments ranging from the humid swamps of Louisiana to the frozen expanses of the Alaskan tundra. Despite these exhaustive efforts, every proposed solution had, in one critical aspect or another, ultimately proven inadequate. Now, the engineers were confronted with the agonizing reality of watching these past failures unfold in real time, with dire consequences, across the vast distance of 7,000 miles in the distant Pacific. The initial significant endeavor to address this pervasive problem emerged in early 1941, when engineering teams experimented with a concept designated as square mesh track. This innovative design comprised a robust grid of welded steel bars, visually resembling a heavily reinforced chain-link fence constructed from rebar. The underlying theoretical principle held considerable promise: to establish a rigid structural framework capable of effectively distributing the immense weight of an aircraft across a significantly broader surface area, thereby preventing localized sinking. The engineers deployed this material at Langley Field in Virginia, where they proceeded to conduct a test involving a B-17 bomber. As the formidable 30-ton aircraft traversed the mesh, they observed with dismay as the entire structure folded and crumpled with the ease of tinfoil. The steel employed was simply insufficient in thickness to withstand the intense, concentrated pressure exerted by the aircraft's landing gear. However, the alternative of substantially increasing the steel's gauge to achieve the necessary strength presented an insurmountable logistical hurdle. The resulting material would become so prohibitively heavy that a dedicated cargo ship would be required solely to transport enough mesh for the construction of a single runway. Following the square mesh track, the spring of 1941 saw the initiation of experiments involving what was termed Hessian mat. British engineers had previously reported a degree of success utilizing burlap fabric, heavily coated in asphalt, as a provisional roadway material in the challenging terrain of North Africa. American engineers, intrigued by these reports, logically posited that if such a material proved effective for vehicular traffic, it might similarly serve the needs of aircraft. Consequently, they embarked on a project involving the saturation of thousands of yards of robust jute fabric in molten asphalt. This treated material was then carefully laid across soft ground at Wright Field in Ohio, where a series of landing tests were conducted using P-40 fighter aircraft. The initial landing proceeded without incident, offering a fleeting glimmer of hope. However, the second landing immediately produced noticeable ruts in the surface. By the 10th landing, the fabric had catastrophically disintegrated, tearing completely apart, with substantial chunks of asphalt-soaked burlap becoming lodged and jamming critical landing gear mechanisms. By June of that same year, the entire concept was decisively relegated to the rejection pile. Initially, the strategy involving a mixture of coral and gravel appeared to hold considerably more promise, primarily because it sought to replicate the inherent stability of natural hardpan surfaces. In July 1941, engineers proceeded to construct experimental runways utilizing crushed coral aggregate, blended with volcanic rock, materials that were conveniently abundant across the islands of the Pacific. This composite material was then meticulously compacted using powerful steamrollers until it achieved an impressive, almost concrete-like hardness. For a period of 3 uninterrupted weeks, this test surface performed flawlessly under continuous aircraft operations, fostering a sense of cautious optimism. However, this period of success was abruptly shattered by the arrival of the rains. This was no mere light shower, but a full-fledged tropical deluge, unleashing a staggering 6 inches of precipitation within a mere 2-hour span. Under this onslaught, the entire meticulously prepared surface rapidly transformed into a soupy, unstable slurry. Engineers observed with dismay as the carefully graded runway developed deep, cavernous gullies, some profound enough to conceal a standing man. Compounding the disaster, once coral becomes saturated and begins to decompose, it becomes nearly impossible to recompact effectively, meaning that, in essence, the entire construction effort had to be abandoned and restarted from scratch. Of all the experimental solutions conceived, pierced steel planking, or PSP, demonstrated the most encouraging potential for success. Originally developed by British engineers for the swift construction of temporary roadways, these consisted of flat steel plates, each approximately 10 feet in length and 15 inches in width, distinguished by a pattern of holes perforated through their surface. These perforations served a dual purpose, significantly reducing the overall weight of each plank while simultaneously enhancing traction. The United States military initiated trials of PSP for runway applications in August 1941, conducting tests at Bolling Field. Engineers were particularly impressed by the remarkable rapidity of its installation. It was possible to lay down an entire runway in a manner akin to shingling, completing the task in mere days rather than weeks. However, PSP harbored a critical, ultimately fatal flaw when subjected to the relentless tropical heat. Steel, by its very nature, expands considerably when exposed to elevated temperatures, and under the unforgiving equatorial sun, these plates would inevitably buckle and warp. This deformation created hazardous ridges across the surface, capable of severely damaging or even shearing off aircraft landing gear. Pilots who experienced landings on such distorted PSP reported the sensation as akin to touching down on a high-speed washboard at 80 miles per hour, underscoring the extreme danger posed by this structural instability. As autumn of 1941 drew to a close, the dedicated engineering teams found themselves increasingly bereft of viable concepts and rapidly approaching the limits of their allocated timeframe. Then, December 1941 irrevocably altered the entire strategic landscape. The devastating attack on Pearl Harbor transcended a mere military catastrophe. It served as an urgent, stark awakening to the reality that the burgeoning Pacific theater of operations would necessitate groundbreaking solutions, innovations that had, as yet, not even been conceived. In response to this unprecedented demand, the Corps of Engineers swiftly issued an urgent contract request to American steel manufacturers, articulating a highly specific and challenging set of requirements. They stipulated the need for a runway surface capable of being installed within a matter of days, robust enough to support aircraft weighing up to 50,000 pounds, equally effective whether laid over treacherous mud or abrasive coral, and crucially, resilient enough to endure severe tropical conditions without succumbing to warping. Furthermore, a critical logistical constraint was imposed. The material had to be sufficiently lightweight to be transported across vast oceanic distances on cargo vessels already burdened to capacity with essential tanks and ammunition. The formidable challenge was ultimately undertaken by the Carnegie Illinois Steel Corporation, headquartered in Pittsburgh. Their principal engineer, James Marston, meticulously reviewed the extensive catalog of prior failures and arrived at a profound realization. The fundamental approach to the problem had been conceptually flawed. Previous attempts had consistently focused on engineering a surface that sought to emulate the rigid characteristics of concrete or densely compacted earth. Marston's pivotal insight, however, was elegantly simpler and utterly revolutionary. Instead of futilely attempting to conquer or displace the intractable mud, the solution lay in devising a means to effectively float upon its surface. He immediately began to sketch a design that bore little resemblance to a conventional road surface, envisioning instead something more akin to a resilient, flexible metal carpet. With remarkable speed, by February 1942, Marston's dedicated team had successfully developed and fabricated a working prototype. This innovative creation was a steel plank, precisely measuring 10 feet in length and 15 inches in width, yet virtually every other aspect of its design represented a revolutionary departure from existing solutions. Foremost among these advancements was its strategic thickness, a robust 3/16 of an inch of high-strength steel. This specific gauge proved perfectly calibrated, offering sufficient rigidity to effectively resist buckling under the substantial loads imposed by aircraft, while simultaneously remaining thin enough that each individual plank weighed a manageable 66 pounds. This weight allowed 2 men to physically maneuver and position the planks without the necessity of heavy machinery. Furthermore, the engineers incorporated a distinctive pattern of rows of holes punched across the entire surface, giving the material an appearance somewhat akin to an industrial cheese grater. These perforations were far from mere aesthetic embellishments. Each strategically placed hole served a critical triple function. It significantly reduced the overall weight of the plank by approximately 30%, allowed rainwater to drain efficiently through the surface rather than accumulating on top, and created numerous small edges that provided crucial grip for aircraft tires, enhancing safety and stability during landings and takeoffs. However, the true stroke of genius inherent in the design resided in the meticulously crafted edges of the planks. Both of the long sides of each plank featured sophisticated interlocking mechanisms, elements that Marston's team had painstakingly dedicated months to perfecting. One edge was ingeniously fashioned with a raised lip culminating in a distinct, upward curving hooked end. The opposing edge was designed with a precisely corresponding channel. When two planks were brought together and laid side by side, the hooked end of one would seamlessly slide into the channel of the other, forming a secure, self-locking connection. This ingenious system operated not through the use of bolts or welds, but purely via mechanical pressure. The resulting connection was remarkably robust, possessing sufficient strength to permit a 50,000-pound aircraft to traverse the seam without any risk of the planks separating. Simultaneously, this interlocking system retained enough inherent flexibility to allow the entire mat of planks to gently bend and conform to the contours of uneven ground without fracturing or coming apart, a crucial feature for deployment in varied and unpredictable terrain. The short ends of each plank, in contrast to the long sides, employed a distinct yet equally effective interlocking system. This involved a straightforward overlapping joint, whereby the end of one plank would smoothly slide beneath the adjacent plank. This clever arrangement ensured the creation of a continuous, unbroken surface extending the entire length of the runway, critically devoid of any gaps wide enough to potentially snare an aircraft wheel. An additional, highly beneficial consequence of this overlapping design was that, as downward pressure from an aircraft's weight was applied, the planks actually engaged and locked more tightly together, rather than exhibiting any tendency to spread apart, thereby enhancing the overall structural integrity of the entire runway surface. The innovation ensured that components remained tightly interconnected instead of dispersing. In the spring of 1942, specifically March, the United States Army conducted rigorous trials at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, a site intentionally selected for its infamously yielding terrain, which closely mimicked the challenging conditions of Pacific mud. Here, skilled engineers meticulously deployed 1,200 square feet of Marston's ingeniously designed interlocking metal planks directly onto the undisturbed, marshy earth. A heavily laden B-17 bomber was then maneuvered across this makeshift runway. Observers noted the mat's inherent pliability. A visible undulation or ripple could be discerned as the massive aircraft's weight traversed its surface, yet the structure steadfastly maintained its integrity. Over a span of 3 consecutive days, a total of 50 takeoffs and landings were executed. While the mat exhibited minor superficial abrasions, not a single instance of structural compromise was recorded. Subsequent examination, after a section was carefully lifted, revealed that the underlying ground had settled approximately 2 inches. Crucially, the interconnected plank system had uniformly distributed this compression, preventing localized stress points. Consequently, no stress fractures or disjunctions at the seams were present. Impressed by these conclusive results, the military promptly placed an order for an astounding 60 million square feet of the material. To fully grasp the operational efficacy of these specialized mats, one must delve into the fundamental physics governing the impact of a massive 30-ton bomber upon yielding ground. The core challenge does not stem from the aircraft's aggregate mass itself, but rather from the intense concentration of that immense weight. Consider, for instance, a B-25 Mitchell bomber, which, when fully provisioned, tips the scales at approximately 35,000 pounds. This entire formidable load is channeled through a limited number of contact points, specifically 2 primary landing gear struts and a single tail wheel. With each main gear equipped with dual tires, the colossal 35,000 pounds are effectively focused onto an approximate 4 square foot footprint of ground contact. This translates to an astonishing pressure of nearly 9,000 pounds per square foot exerted upon the earth with every aircraft touchdown. In stark contrast, typical soft soil possesses a bearing capacity of perhaps only 300 pounds per square foot before succumbing to deformation. The inherent disparity in these figures renders the engineering predicament immediately apparent, requiring no intricate calculations to comprehend its severity. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. We invite you to share where you are from and your thoughts on the video's topic in the comments section below. The ingenious design of Marston mat effectively resolved this critical issue by orchestrating a sophisticated distribution of the load across numerous individual planes, essentially, a multitude of planks functioning in concert as a cohesive, unified system. When a landing gear wheel made contact with a single plank, that individual section did not bear the burden in isolation. Instead, the precisely engineered interlocking hooks and channels ensured that the applied force was instantaneously disseminated to the 4 immediately adjoining planks, 2 situated laterally on either side, and 1 positioned directly ahead and 1 directly behind. These planks, in turn, propagated the load further to their respective neighbors, creating a remarkable cascading effect. Consequently, by the moment the initial 9,000 pounds per square foot of pressure reached the underlying natural ground, it had been diffused across an expansive area, roughly 100 square feet of the mat's surface. This masterful load spreading meant the earth beneath was now subjected to a mere 90 pounds per square foot, a force comfortably within the supportive capacity of even the most notoriously unstable soil. The inherent flexibility embedded within the Marston mat system proved to be an attribute of paramount importance, rivaling its demonstrable strength. Conventional concrete runways, by their very nature, are unyielding and rigid. While this characteristic is perfectly suited for applications upon stable, solid foundations, it leads to catastrophic failure when deployed on soft or unstable ground. Should even a small segment of a concrete slab subside marginally below the elevation of its adjacent sections, the inflexible material inevitably fractures. Once such a crack manifests, water penetration becomes inevitable, accelerating the rapid and widespread deterioration of the entire structure. In stark contrast, Marston mat exhibited no such cracking because its design intentionally eschewed rigidity. Each individual plank possessed the capacity for minute, independent movement, quantities on the order of mere fractions of an inch, all while meticulously preserving its critical interlocking connection. This innovative design allowed the entire runway surface to effectively float upon the terrain, much like an enormous steel raft, seamlessly adapting to any subsidence or subtle shifts occurring beneath it without succumbing to fragmentation. The perforations strategically punched through each individual plank served a purpose far beyond the mere reduction of overall weight. These apertures ingeniously fashioned what engineering professionals term a semi-permeable surface. Consequently, during periods of precipitation, a virtually incessant occurrence in the Pacific theater, water did not accumulate detrimentally atop the runway, thereby averting the perilous risks of hydroplaning. Instead, it efficiently drained directly through these precisely sized holes. The remarkable ingenuity, however, lay in a specific detail. The holes measured approximately 2 inches in diameter. This dimension was critically important because aircraft tires, being considerably broader, still encountered an ample expanse of solid steel for optimal traction and grip. Effectively, from the perspective of an aircraft tire, the surface presented itself as substantially solid, whereas for water, it functioned as an expedited drainage system. Comprehensive testing conducted at Wright Field in April 1942 conclusively demonstrated that water dissipated from a Marston mat runway a remarkable 6 times more rapidly than from conventional solid surfaces. Furthermore, the distinctive interlocking edges of the planks unexpectedly provided a brilliant solution to an unforeseen logistical challenge: the swift repair of bomb damage. When an enemy Japanese bomber inflicted a crater upon a Marston mat runway, a simple patching method, akin to that used for concrete, was not feasible. Instead, it necessitated the replacement of entire sections. Yet, precisely because the planks interconnected without the need for welding or bolting, repair personnel could effortlessly disengage the compromised planks, slide them out of position, and insert new ones with remarkable celerity. At Hendersonfield, engineers meticulously timed this particular process. It was observed that a bomb crater capable of obliterating a 20-foot segment of the runway could be completely repaired and rendered operational once more in less than 40 minutes. This astonishing timeframe specifically pertained to replacing the matte surface, and did not even encompass the task of filling the crater itself. In stark contrast, a comparable repair on a concrete runway could demand several days, necessitating specialized machinery for pouring and curing new material. The inherent simplicity of the Marston mat system also translated into minimal training prerequisites. The installation of these portable runways did not require highly specialized engineers. Rather, it could be competently executed by individuals capable of adhering to a straightforward pattern and working with efficiency. August 17, 1942, marked a pivotal moment at Hendersonfield. The inaugural consignment of Marston mat reached the shores of Guadalcanal, transported by cargo vessels that had bravely navigated a perilous gauntlet of lurking Japanese submarines to deliver their vital payload. Personnel from the naval construction battalions, famously known as the Seabees, undertook the arduous task of offloading 36 tons of steel planking directly onto the beach, even as relentless Zero fighters repeatedly strafed the adjacent shoreline. Their monumental efforts were driven by an acutely pressing deadline, one not calculated in terms of mere days, but rather in the precious few hours remaining before the inevitable arrival of the next Japanese bombing raid. These dedicated Seabees, remarkably, possessed no prior familiarity with this novel construction material. Just a few short months prior, the majority of them had been ordinary civilian construction workers, skilled carpenters, robust steelworkers, and proficient equipment operators, all conscripted from their peacetime occupations building vital highways and extensive bridges across the American landscape. Now, they found themselves thrust into an active combat theater, confronted with the daunting challenge of improvising and constructing an entire airfield from rudimentary beginnings, all under the constant and immediate threat of enemy fire. The immediate realization that dawned upon them was the stark disparity between the seemingly manageable weight of 66 pounds per plank and the grueling reality of manually transporting these heavy sections hundreds of yards through suffocating 100-degree Fahrenheit heat coupled with oppressive 90% humidity. Out of sheer necessity, they rapidly established an efficient rhythm for the arduous work. Teams of 2 men would swiftly retrieve planks from the burgeoning stockpiles and laboriously transport them to the designated edge of the burgeoning runway. A third individual assumed the crucial role of guide, meticulously aligning each plank to ensure the precise engagement of its interlocking edges. The initial row proved relatively straightforward to install, involving simply laying the planks side by side upon the cleared ground. However, every subsequent row demanded the precise execution of the hook and channel connection. The ingenious technique they devised involved tilting the new plank at a subtle angle, deftly sliding its hook beneath the channel of the already positioned plank, and then allowing it to drop flat. When the plank correctly seated itself, a distinct metallic click resonated, a sound that quickly became the most profoundly satisfying auditory signal these men experienced, signifying that the connection was securely locked. The demanding labor on the runway unfolded in frantic, intense bursts, punctuated by the relentless rhythm of enemy air raids. Japanese bombers were targeting Hendersonfield with alarming frequency, often striking almost daily, and sometimes even twice within a single 24-hour period. The resourceful Seabees swiftly developed a keen vigilance for enemy spotter planes. The appearance of a solitary reconnaissance aircraft was a chilling harbinger, indicating that a wave of bombers would likely follow within approximately an hour. Upon hearing the alert, every man instantly abandoned his tools and sprinted for the relative safety of a foxhole. The bombers would then sweep overhead, unleash their destructive payloads, and depart. Following their departure, the Seabees patiently observed a 10-minute interval, a critical precaution to allow for any unexploded ordnance to detonate safely. Immediately thereafter, they would return to the runway, resuming their work precisely from where they had been forced to halt. Should a bomb impact a section of the runway they had already completed, they would efficiently unlock the compromised planks and swiftly replace them. If, however, the ordnance struck an area they had not yet reached, they would expediently fill the resultant crater with readily available coral and continue the process of laying the mat directly over it. By August 20th, a mere 3 days subsequent to the initial delivery of the matting material, a crucial section of the runway, measuring 200 feet in length and 75 feet in width, was declared fully operational. This segment, while not constituting a complete airfield, Henderson Field would ultimately require a substantial 5,000 feet to safely accommodate larger bombers, was nonetheless sufficient for the deployment of fighter aircraft. That very afternoon, a contingent of 19 formidable Wildcat fighters and 12 agile Dauntless dive bombers successfully flew in from the aircraft carrier Enterprise. These specific aircraft, bearing the designations VMF-232 and VMSB-232, would soon become renowned as the illustrious Cactus Air Force, a moniker derived from Guadalcanal's distinctive radio call sign. They were, quite remarkably, touching down on a prepared surface that had simply not existed a mere 72 hours beforehand. The pilots, upon landing, conveyed that the experience of operating on Marston Mat felt distinctly different from either concrete or compacted earth. They perceived a subtle yielding sensation, a palpable flex transmitted through the landing gear. Some aviators likened the sensation to landing on a robust trampoline. This inherent flexibility, in fact, rendered the surface more accommodating. Aircraft approaching with excessive force did not rebound with the same violent intensity, because the resilient mat effectively absorbed a portion of the considerable impact energy. By September 5, 1942, a comprehensive Marston Mat runway, extending an impressive 5,200 feet in length and 150 feet in width, had been entirely completed at Henderson Field. The cumulative installation duration, notwithstanding significant interruptions caused by persistent air raids and incessant artillery barrages, amounted to an extraordinary 19 days. In stark contrast, conventional concrete construction methods would have demanded a minimum of 3 months to achieve a similar feat, even under the most favorable and ideal conditions, a description that unequivocally failed to characterize any aspect of the Guadalcanal environment. While the grueling campaign on Guadalcanal unequivocally validated the fundamental concept of the portable airfield, it was the subsequent events that truly illuminated the profound strategic significance of these adaptable runways. By early 1943, the United States military was meticulously formulating an ambitious island-hopping strategy across the vast expanse of the Pacific, a campaign destined to span an astonishing 7,000 miles, from the Solomon Islands all the way to the Japanese home archipelago. Each and every one of these targeted islands would necessitate the rapid establishment of a fully operational airfield. The entrenched Japanese defensive doctrine hinged upon transforming each island into an impregnable fortress, a process designed to protract capture over many months. Marston Mat, however, dramatically curtailed and fundamentally altered that projected timeline. In February 1943, the focus shifted to the Russell Islands. United States Marines disembarked, braced for fierce resistance, only to discover that the Japanese forces had already withdrawn. With astonishing swiftness, within a mere 60 hours of the initial troops establishing a beachhead, the indefatigable Seabees had constructed a fully operational fighter strip, meticulously laid with Marston mat. The sheer rapidity of this accomplishment was so astounding that when Admiral William Halsey arrived to conduct a personal inspection, he famously inquired of the battalion commander whether construction had commenced prior to the island being fully secured. The answer was negative. They had simply attained an unparalleled level of efficiency. This newly established airfield in the Russell Islands immediately furnished critical air cover for the subsequent advance up the Solomon Islands chain, thereby dramatically reducing what would have been protracted weeks of tactical vulnerability to a mere matter of days. The reduction of strategic vulnerability, once measured in protracted months, was dramatically compressed, sometimes to mere days. A compelling illustration of this transformation unfolded at Munda Point on New Georgia Island in August 1943. This particular operation presented unique challenges, as Japanese forces remained entrenched, their formidable bunkers strategically positioned to overlook the proposed airfield site. Undeterred, the U.S. Navy Seabees, renowned for their construction prowess, undertook the perilous task of laying Marston mat directly under enemy fire. They innovated audacious tactics that, while seemingly suicidal, proved effective. Half of the battalion diligently positioned the interlocking steel planks, while the other half provided crucial covering fire with their rifles and machine guns. The cost in human lives was significant, with 14 men tragically killed and 47 wounded. Yet, against all odds, the runway achieved operational status in a remarkable 11 days, enabling Marine Corsair fighters to commence vital missions from Munda even as Japanese snipers were still being systematically eliminated from the perimeter. Further advancements in rapid airfield construction emerged in November 1943 during the Bougainville campaign, where military engineers initiated groundbreaking experiments with prefabrication techniques. Rather than laboriously laying individual planks, specialists stationed in Australia began pre-assembling large sections of Marston mat into substantial panels, each measuring 50 feet by 15 feet. These colossal sections were then carefully loaded onto LSTs, or landing ship, tanks, and transported across the sea fully intact. Upon the LSTs beaching at Bougainville, powerful cranes efficiently lifted these pre-assembled sections directly onto ground that had been prepared in advance. This innovative approach slashed construction time dramatically. A runway that would have traditionally required 2 weeks for plank-by-plank installation was completed in an astonishing 4 days. By December of that same year, Bougainville boasted 3 fully functional Marston mat runways, ingeniously arranged in a triangular pattern, which permitted simultaneous takeoffs and landings, irrespective of the prevailing wind direction. The sheer volume of Marston mat production serves as a powerful testament to its indispensable role in the war effort. In 1942, a consortium of 10 steel manufacturers, led by Carnegie, Illinois, produced 8 million square feet of the material. This figure skyrocketed to 40 million square feet in 1943, and by 1944, annual production reached an astounding 60 million square feet, a quantity sufficient to construct a continuous runway stretching from New York to Philadelphia. The military's insatiable demand for Marston mat became so immense that it precipitated a steel shortage, impacting other vital wartime initiatives. For example, tank production experienced a temporary reduction as steel furnaces were strategically reprioritized to meet the urgent need for runway matting. The versatility of Marston mat was further demonstrated in January 1945 at Lingayen Gulf in the Philippines. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask US to stay with US and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. During this operation, the material was utilized in a manner entirely unforeseen by its original designers. Engineers ingeniously deployed the matting across sandy beaches, effectively creating immediate piers and robust roadways for the swift movement of supply trucks. They quickly ascertained that the mat possessed an equal aptitude for distributing the weight of wheeled vehicles as it did for aircraft. Consequently, supply convoys, which would ordinarily have become hopelessly bogged down in the soft beach sand, were now able to drive directly from their landing craft to inland supply dumps with remarkable efficiency, thereby streamlining critical logistical operations. Another pivotal, though perhaps less recognized, installation occurred in February 1945 on Iwo Jima. This particular application stands as one of the most famous uses of Marston mat during the conflict. The island's unique volcanic ash presented an almost insurmountable construction challenge. Its incredibly fine and loose consistency was akin to attempting to build upon powdered sugar. Traditional concrete simply would not cure properly due to the ash contaminating the mixture, and compacted earth was an impossibility given the complete absence of actual soil. In this extreme environment, Marston mat emerged as the sole viable solution. The indomitable Seabees meticulously laid the matting across all 3 airfields on the island, a monumental undertaking performed even as the brutal battle for Mount Suribachi continued to rage fiercely. Following the cessation of hostilities in August 1945, military planners largely concluded that Marston mat would swiftly become obsolete. The return to peacetime conditions suggested that ample time would be available for the construction of permanent, robust concrete runways. Consequently, vast quantities of the steel matting were stockpiled at various depots across the Pacific, with thousands of tons sitting in warehouses, awaiting eventual scrapping or sale. However, destiny intervened on June 25, 1950, when North Korea launched its invasion of South Korea. The U.S. military found itself in a desperate scramble to establish air superiority in a theater almost entirely devoid of adequate infrastructure. In this sudden crisis, those previously deemed obsolete stockpiles of Marston mat were urgently retrieved from storage. Korea's challenging terrain, characterized by rugged mountains, harsh winters, and soil that froze solid, presented a stark contrast to the tropical Pacific islands for which the mat was originally conceived. Engineers initially harbored doubts about the mat's performance in sub-zero temperatures, quickly discovering that steel does indeed become brittle in extreme cold. Nevertheless, the ingenious interlocking design of the mat proved resilient. Its inherent flexibility, which had allowed it to function effectively on soft ground, remarkably also enabled its success on frozen terrain. When the soil froze and expanded, the mat gracefully flexed upward. Conversely, as it thawed and contracted, the mat settled back down, exhibiting no cracking or separation. Kimpo Airfield, situated near Seoul, became the crucial proving ground for this unexpected adaptability. By September 1950, Kimpo Airfield lay in ruins, its concrete runways deliberately destroyed by retreating North Korean forces. Yet, with remarkable speed, U.S. Air Force engineers deployed Marston mat directly over the shattered concrete, restoring an operational runway in just 72 hours. Almost immediately, F-86 Sabres began launching combat missions from Kimpo, even as concrete repair crews continued the laborious task of jackhammering rubble on adjacent sections. The Korean War ultimately saw 38 airfields utilizing Marston mat, and it was during this conflict that the military introduced a new designation, PSP, or pierced steel planking. While the original name, Marston mat, gradually faded from official lexicon, the underlying technology remained fundamentally identical. The mat's enduring utility resurfaced once more in Vietnam in 1965, by which time some of the planks were nearly 25 years old. Astonishingly, some sections were literally the same steel planks that had seen service on Guadalcanal decades earlier, still fully functional after 2 decades of use. Engineers deployed them at key locations such as Da Nang and Bien Hoa, creating vital dispersal pads for helicopters and expanding existing runway capacities. The Vietnamese climate, with its monsoons, intense heat, and acidic soil, closely mirrored the conditions of the Pacific Islands for which the mat was initially designed, and it performed with the same unwavering reliability as it had in 1942. However, the narrative of Marston mat takes an unexpected and compelling turn after the Vietnam War, finding its way into a diverse array of civilian applications. Oil companies, for instance, began adopting it in the frigid landscapes of Alaska and Canada to construct temporary roads and drilling pads across delicate permafrost without causing irreparable damage to the fragile tundra ecosystem. The very same principles of weight distribution that had prevented heavy bombers from sinking into the soft Pacific mud now effectively prevented massive trucks from melting the permafrost. Notably, environmental groups actually endorsed its use due to its removable nature. Upon the completion of drilling operations, the matting could be effortlessly retrieved, allowing the tundra to recover, a stark contrast to the lasting environmental impact of permanent gravel roads. In January 2010, following a devastating magnitude 7.0 earthquake that ravaged Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Marston mat once again played a crucial role in a humanitarian crisis. While the international airport's main runway remained intact, the surrounding infrastructure was annihilated, creating severe bottlenecks for incoming relief flights. The U.S. military swiftly airlifted pallets of Marston mat, the production of which continues to this day, and laid it across damaged taxiways and parking aprons. This rapid deployment allowed cargo planes laden with critical medical supplies and food to unload and taxi to newly established parking areas that had not existed a mere 48 hours prior. Thus, the technology originally conceived to combat the Japanese Empire was now instrumental in saving the lives of earthquake victims. Contemporary military forces worldwide continue to maintain strategic stockpiles of this adaptable material. The U.S. Air Force now refers to it as AM2 matting, officially designated aluminum membrane version 2, reflecting a shift from steel to lighter aluminum alloys. Despite this material change, the fundamental design remains instantly recognizable. The same distinctive interlocking edges, the familiar perforated surface, and the core concept first sketched by Marston in 1942. The British Royal Air Force employs it, and NATO forces utilized it in Afghanistan to expand parking areas at Bagram Airfield. It consistently reappears in disaster zones following typhoons, floods, and hurricanes, anywhere there is an urgent need for instant infrastructure on compromised or unprepared ground. Remarkably, sections of the original Marston mat still persist, repurposed for various civilian uses such as walkways, bridge decking, and even decorative fencing. Some remote Pacific islands still retain operational sections laid during World War II, now weathered and worn by decades of exposure, yet astonishingly functional after more than 80 years. While history books and documentaries often highlight the decisive roles of tanks, planes, and ships in winning wars, the underlying reality is that conflicts are often won by the unseen infrastructure, the unglamorous logistics, the complex supply chains, and the unparalleled ability to swiftly transform an otherwise desolate piece of ground into a functional military asset, often faster than the enemy could ever conceive. Marston Mat fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of how the Pacific War could be prosecuted, yet its monumental impact remains largely unknown to the general public. Prior to the advent of these ingenious steel planks, the capture of an island necessitated a commitment to months of arduous construction before that island could become strategically useful. Forces would seize the territory, only to then endure a prolonged waiting period, while engineers meticulously surveyed the land, graded the terrain, poured concrete, and patiently awaited its curing. Throughout this extended period, the newly captured island remained a vulnerable and essentially expensive piece of real estate. The Japanese military had a profound understanding of this strategic equation. Their defensive doctrine relied heavily on the premise that each captured island would take an inordinate amount of time to become operational, thereby stalling American momentum. They would dig in, compelling the Allies to pay a heavy toll in blood for every yard gained, and even after victory, the occupying forces would be tied down for months, rendering the island functional. The very concept of island hopping was, by its traditional definition, designed to be a slow and methodical process. Marston Mat decisively shattered that ingrained assumption. Suddenly, American forces possessed the capability to land on an island and have operational aircraft flying from it within a week, sometimes even within mere days. This revolutionary speed fundamentally reshaped the potential aggressiveness of the American advance. Islands that were previously considered strategic liabilities, precisely because their development would consume too much time, transformed into viable targets. The triumphant Central Pacific Campaign, encompassing critical battles like Tarawa, Kwajalein, and Saipan, succeeded largely because captured islands could immediately provide essential support for the subsequent assault, rather than becoming costly and momentum-sapping pauses in the relentless drive forward. The statistical evidence underscores the profound impact. By the close of 1944, the U.S. military had constructed more than 300 airfields throughout the vast Pacific theater. A staggering 220 of these, approximately, incorporated Marston Mat, either partially or entirely, into their construction. Without this critical innovation, it is estimated that perhaps only a third of those airfields would have been built, and their completion would have required 3 times as long. Such a scenario would have resulted in significantly fewer forward operating bases, necessitating longer flight distances for crucial bomber missions, and critically reducing air coverage for vital naval operations. The entire timeline of the Pacific War, in such a hypothetical absence, could have been protracted by months, or even by a full year. Such pivotal developments could dramatically alter strategic timelines, shifting outcomes by many months, perhaps even a full year. A compelling illustration of this can be found in the relentless bombing campaign directed against Japan itself. The formidable B-29 Superfortress aircraft, instrumental in ultimately compelling Japan's capitulation, originated predominantly from airfields established across the Marianas Archipelago, specifically Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These strategically vital islands were secured by Allied forces during the summer months of 1944. Remarkably, by November 1944, a mere 5 months subsequent to their acquisition, these same locations were serving as launch pads for extensive aerial assaults targeting Tokyo. This astonishing pace was achievable solely because military engineers, possessed the innovative capacity to rapidly deploy Marston mat runways, robust enough to accommodate the most formidable heavy bomber within the United States military inventory, all within a remarkably brief span of weeks. Had conventional methods involving concrete infrastructure been necessary, those crucial raids would have commenced in mid-1945 at the absolute earliest, fundamentally reshaping the strategic assessment of the conflict's conclusion. This narrative unveils a more expansive insight concerning ingenious problem-solving amidst extreme duress. The engineers at Carnegie, Illinois did not conceive of some unfamiliar or novel substance, nor did they pioneer a groundbreaking production methodology. Instead, their brilliance lay in scrutinizing established methods of steel construction and posing more incisive inquiries. They pondered how to achieve robustness devoid of inelasticity, how to impart portability without fragility, and how to render an intricate challenge sufficiently straightforward for fatigued personnel operating within active combat zones to assemble it correctly and efficiently. The true sophistication of their solution resides in its straightforwardness. Perforated steel planks designed to hook together seamlessly, featuring strategically placed holes to facilitate water drainage, and crafted from steel that exhibited a crucial capacity to flex under stress without succumbing to fracture. We urge you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be profoundly grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider writing a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Military historians frequently characterize the Pacific War as fundamentally an aircraft carrier war, a submarine war, or even, more broadly, a war of logistics. While each of these perspectives holds undeniable validity, yet, beneath these overarching narratives, one discovers a conflict profoundly defined by complex engineering problems solved under unyielding temporal constraints. The visionary work of Marston and his dedicated team at Carnegie, Illinois arguably preserved a greater number of human lives and curtailed the duration of the conflict with greater efficacy than any singular weapon system, achieving this not through acts of demolition, but rather through ingenious acts of creation. They mastered the art of transforming treacherous mud into functional runways, dense jungles into operational air bases, and seemingly desolate atolls into vital launching platforms. In essence, they rendered the seemingly insurmountable challenges of supply and movement entirely manageable. And in the brutal theater of war, the mastery of logistical operations represents the ultimate determinant of success. Those unassuming, perforated steel planks, with their deceptively simple interlocking edges, transcended their primary function of merely constructing airstrips.